Russia has moved to tighten its conscription law, pressing more men to fight. The parliament has backed a move for digital draft papers. The State Duma backed the necessary legislation in 2 separate votes. So what does this new legislation mean? Let me break it down for you. It means that Russia will introduce electronic military draft papers for the first time in its history. Needless to say, it will make it harder for men to avoid being drafted. The move is part of a push by Moscow to bolster its military in Ukraine. The Kremlin has denied plans for a controversial new mobilization, but the law provides for electronic military summons that will also ban draftees from leaving the country, of course, quietly sweeping out thousands more men to fight for Russia. Electric summons will be issued to conscripts under Russia's compulsory military services for men between the age of 18 and 27. That will also include the members of the Russian military reserve and others. Now, let me jog your memory a bit. When Russian President Putin announced a mobilization in the fall, thousands of men fled the country. Many even went into hiding. The mobilization had triggered anger and even public protests. It created scenes of young men being grabbed from the streets and at subway stations. Many wrestled to the ground in shopping malls. In some cases, passerby filmed men fleeing military officials. And this is precisely Russian army's problem that the new tough measures will now be aiming to address. It will make it impossible for Russians to dodge conscription in the future. The bar on departing the country will take effect from the moment the draft is electronically sent, that notification, and so much so military draft officers will be able to register draftees in their absence, which wasn't the case so far. Let's try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of what this means for Russians and for the status of this war, which doesn't seem to be ending anytime now. And for that, I'm joined in by Fred Ware, who's a renowned journalist, joining me live from Moscow. Thank you, Fred. It's a pleasure to have you, as usual. Is this bill laying the groundwork for a more seamless expansion of Russia's recruitment attempts?
Of course, yes. The mobilization that happened last September up to October, was terribly botched. It was the first one in 40 years, and it was sort of appeared on an emergency basis. But it terrified men of military age all over the country. The goal had only been to recruit 300,000 reservists, men with military experience and special skills or professions that had application to the military operations underway. And they did eventually get those 300,000, but in the process, they triggered this mass exodus from the country and social panic. And it was then that they did decide. I remember being told that the state is going to now digitalize the reserves.
Right.
Mainly. It is all men of military age, but especially those who've had some military experience, done their, what used to be 3 years, now it's 1 year, and therefore are classified as reservists. So now, I mean, I don't know whether the rush now to get this done signals a fresh mobilization coming up. It might well do. But in general, this was planned in order to prevent that. So now in future, it will be easier to get men who've been designated for recruitment and also prevent them from leaving the country. There's a whole range of measures to expedite this. But also it will avoid that panic in future. People who are to be recruited will know it, and everyone else who isn't will also know that they're not on the list right now, and they won't jump up and run out of the country or panic. So that is the goal of this measure, and whether or not we're going to see a new military mobilization in the coming months, I think depends on what happens in the battlefield in the next few weeks.
All right. In retrospect, it's interesting you talk about that chaos. Should this bill now be viewed as Russia's silent admission of failure after that chaos that ensued in September last year when many went into hiding to avoid being sent to fight?
Yes, I think that there's no doubt. I talk to officials, I talk to pro-war analysts. Nobody denies that that mobilization last September was a disaster. I mean, it did achieve its goal in the end, but it roiled society. It caused so much damage, and was a terrible black eye for Russia. I mean, on the PR front, and Russia cannot afford a lot of those. Um, so yes, of course, this is a big correction, but it's a rationalization of the system, and it does set the stage now for Russia to be able to do this, to mobilize larger forces in
Right.
future, because I think the perspective here is not just this war in Ukraine, but that Russia is now at loggerheads with NATO, and that it may require down the road much bigger, faster, more efficient expansions of its military forces.
Yet, Russian officials have denied that the bill will lay the groundwork for, is not basically laying the groundwork for a fresh wave of mobilization. But I'm sure there are growing fears among Russian men. What is the sentiment on ground level?
Yeah, I think that things have largely returned to normal. I mean, normal in quotation marks, and you don't see people panicking at the moment. And I think that the government's idea is to get this digitalization in place so that that won't happen again. If they do need to, but yes, I think there's a great deal of social apprehension. People are, I mean, this war is just
Hmm.
monstrously catastrophic. And even if the battlefield news is a little bit better for the Russian side, I don't know anybody who likes this. And if I were a man of military age, and I'm not a Russian citizen, but if I were, I would be really, really worried. So I'm sure that, well, I know many who do worry about this.
Is Russia having a problem generating trained military manpower?
Sorry, what?
Is Russia having a problem generating trained military manpower?
Well, Russia has, a large pool of people who've done their mandatory military service. I think the number is about 25 million uh, potential reservists between the ages of like mm, 25 and 50. Um, there and I mean, a lot of them did their service a long time ago, but many of them fought in Chechnya or Syria. I mean, this is one thing that has to be taken into account in this awful war in Ukraine, that Russia's potential staying power and ability to ramp up um, is enormous, and this digitalization will, of course, make it much easier for them to do that.
All right. Many thanks to you, Fred, for sharing your precious inputs with us. It's been a very insightful conversation. I'm sure this is bound to impact the timeline also, since Russia's burgeoning need for more personnel only indicates that this is going to be a protracted war.